Welcome to the Happy Guitarist Podcast, Ep.2. I'm Clare from Clare's Guitar Lessons on YouTube and Patreon. And today's episode is all about choosing your first acoustic guitar and things to look out for. So if you're going to be buying an acoustic guitar, congratulations. It's a great thing to do. If you're going to a music shop or maybe you're buying one privately online. And I thought it would be really good to share some tips with you, what I've learned over the years, things to look out for when you're buying a guitar, because there's been a few times I've got something and I thought, it's actually, do you know what? This isn't quite suitable for me because of whatever. And the first thing I want to talk about is the size of the guitar, because generally acoustic guitars will come in a dreadnought shape. That's like the classic acoustic guitar shape, and that's probably the most popular acoustic guitar shape for a steel strung guitar, because if you're going to be buying a steel strung guitar, it's slightly different to when you're buying a nylon strung guitar, which is like a classical guitar. So I'm just going to be talking about steel strung guitars today mainly. So if you're going to be getting an acoustic steel strung guitar, you'll probably be looking at dreadnought models, which are absolutely fantastic. There's nothing wrong with them. But one thing to just bear in mind is if you're like me and you've got quite small hands and maybe you're a little bit short, nothing wrong with being short. I'm just bigging up the short crew here. You know, it's absolutely fine being short, but it means that you're going to have to get your arm around this big guitar. And I spent many, many years doing this and I was fine with that. You know, I adapted to it. But it was a revelation for me when I got to own a beautiful parlor guitar, which is like a slightly smaller model. It's more like a folk guitar. So it has a shorter neck and a smaller body. And it's the main guitar that I use it in most of my guitar lessons on YouTube. It's a Tanglewood. I got it off my dad when I was about 25. So I've had it a long time. I've had it for over 20 years, this guitar. You know, it's really beautiful. It's fantastic. But it is quite a small guitar. So it has a lot of advantages for me having smaller hands, etc. And when I started to play that guitar, it just felt a lot more natural and a lot more like I was at home with it, you know, than sort of grappling around a big dreadnought. So it's something for you to bear in mind when you're choosing a guitar is just have a look at the different sizes and what you feel comfortable playing. There are many advantages to playing the folk style guitars and the smaller bodied guitars. One of them being obviously they have that smaller neck, so it might be easier for you to get your hand around the fretboard and to get your arm around, your rhythm arm around, you know, when you're doing your strumming. And I just want to have a little mention about the tone differences, because it's not something that you might think of, but they sound very different. These smaller guitars have more of a middle punch to them when you play them. And I think it's to do with the fact that the body is smaller. So it just affects how the guitar sounds overall. And you'll get more of a punch on those middle notes, middle frequencies, you know. The bigger guitars, like the dreadnoughts, I own, thanks to my dear dad, a beautiful Martin now. It's a dreadnought guitar, you know, and I've started playing it in some of the videos. You may have noticed it. It's a beautiful guitar, and it's so much louder overall than my smaller guitar. You know, like the bass frequencies are much louder on it, and it also has a lovely high end, you know, like the trebles. I feel that it's just louder overall as an instrument, but the smaller bodied guitar has more punch to it. So that's something else to kind of bear in mind when you're looking at guitars and trying them out. You'll notice the difference in the tones. And then the next thing I want to talk about, and this is really, really important, folks, when you're choosing a guitar, is check the quality of the neck, you know, because over time, the neck is something that is really important. If you have a guitar that has a weak neck, for example, over time, that will really affect it. And a simple sort of test you can do for that when you're playing it is when you're playing a chord, just give it a little kind of, not a huge bend, but just does it bend when you play it, the neck? You know, if you put a little bit of extra pressure on that, can you hear the neck kind of going, can you hear the strings going, like moving a little bit? Because if you can, chances are the neck's not very good. I can give you some tips to deal with that, by the way. I had a friend a long time ago who he had a beautiful 12-string guitar. It was a very old guitar. And he always used to have a capo on the second fret. And I asked him, I said, why have you got a capo on the second fret all of the time? And he said, well, the neck on it is really weak, because it's a 12-string guitar. There's even more pressure, on the neck, because you've got 12 strings instead of 6 strings, giving it that pressure. So over time, he said the neck just couldn't cope with it. So what he did was he tuned his guitar down one whole tone, and then he put a capo on the second fret. So when he was playing his guitar, that was it in kind of the standard tuning, So just a little tip there. If you have got a guitar with a weak neck on it, you can tune it down and put a capo on to kind of help with that. So things to look for with the neck, just have a look. Has it got like a decent truss rod running down the middle of it? Like I say, do the play test. When you're playing it, do you notice it going out of tune easily? If you give it a little kind of pull, and also the action on the neck. So when people talk about action, what they're talking about is the distance from the strings to the fretboard. Is it a high action? So are the strings quite high from the fretboard? Are you having to press really hard? Or is the action nicely set? Is it nice and low so that the strings are only a little bit away from the fretboard, and when you're playing it, it doesn't feel like you're playing cheese wires, That's another important thing to check, especially on an acoustic guitar. I think it's harder to get the action right, On an electric guitar, it's different. There's things that you can do. You can adjust the bridge and the saddles and things on an electric guitar. So when you're trying the guitar out, just make sure there's no fret buzz when you're playing it, because if there's fret buzz, then the action's probably too low. And just make sure that you're comfortable playing that on the neck, that the neck feels nice and smooth, that the tuning is good, So when you play, say you play the open string, play that note higher up the fretboard. Does it sound in tune? Take some time to play the notes up the fretboard. Is it all kind of aligned right so that everything is in tune when you're playing it? It's just something to bear in mind and check on your guitar. And don't rush it, folks. If you're in a music shop, take your time. Don't feel like you have to just like play a few chords and or whatever. Spend as long as you can trying this guitar out and getting to know it and making sure that you're happy with it. Don't feel that you have to rush your purchase. This is really important. You want it to be right. The other thing I want to mention is the quality of the wood. Something that I learned over the years. I had no idea about this when I started playing guitar, and when I was buying my first guitars, I didn't know anything about solid wood tops, for example. So somebody had mentioned to me, is it a solid top? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, if you've got a guitar with a solid top, it just sounds better. It rings out better. And I think what they mean by that is like some of the woods that you can get on the cheaper guitars, they're not solid. They might be made out of like some sort of plywood or something. And that affects the tone of the guitar. It won't sound as nice. It won't ring as nice. And you can also have guitars that are solid all round. They tend to be more expensive. So if you've got a solid top, a solid back, solid sides, like my little Tanglewood that I played, that's solid all round, and someone once told me, that will get better with age because it's solid all round, and I didn't really know what they meant by that. But true enough, as the guitar's gotten older, it sounds even nicer. I think the tones on it sound kind of fuller and richer because the wood, it ages and it just maybe gives it a bit more character over time. So just something to bear in mind. And also the type of wood. So if you have like a light coloured wood, for example, like a sprucey sort of top, it will sound really bright, the tone on the guitar. Whereas if you have a darker wood, like what I've got on the Martin, the wood's much darker. It kind of sounds a bit richer and maybe a bit deeper, not as bright, perhaps. So it's just something to look at when you're looking at your acoustic guitars and you're choosing something. Have a look at the wood. I'll ask them in the shop, does it have a solid top? Because that's really the kind of minimum you want to be striving for. And you get some fantastic guitars now in the budget range, say from between 200 to 400 pounds. You can get some beautiful, beautiful guitars that, they really know what they're doing now. They've been mass producing these guitars for a long time, and they've really been perfecting their methods, so it's not like buying a cheaper guitar, say 20 years ago. Now you can get some fantastic instruments for not very much money. So it's just something to bear in mind. And I think sometimes you can get lucky, like with the mass-produced guitars, there might be one that is just a little bit more special than the others for whatever reason. I think it's a bit of a fine art, crafting a nice acoustic guitar. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of considerations, a lot of variables that can change it from being a little bit special to, being kind of standard. But it'll be things like I was talking about, the quality of the neck, the action on the guitar, how it feels when you're playing it, how it's kind of set up overall. So yeah, and another thing to just check the machine heads, especially if you're buying a second-hand instrument. The machine heads over time, they can get worn, they can not work as well. So you want to make sure that your machine heads are working okay as well on whatever acoustic guitar you're choosing. So yeah, best of luck with it. I hope that you find what you're looking for and get as much enjoyment out of your guitar as I have over the years. It's a real honor to be able to buy your acoustic guitar and play it and cherish it. And thank you everybody for listening to this podcast, and I hope to speak to you all soon for another Happy Guitarist podcast. Happy strumming.